I've been told for a long time that I have a microphone in my stomach, which allows me to project. Well, I am so excited. Thank you for the leadership that you all have taken by being members of DCSRA and for the executive board of DCSRA for having us do this legislative update. There is so much that happened in the 135 odd day session that we just wrapped up. I think for me, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Being in a 31-29 Democratic Party split in the House, the smallest margin since the 60s, when the last time the Democrats were in control of the state House, we thought that this would be an opportunity for us to see more bipartisanship. But the reality was we saw less of it. There were a couple of exceptions that I think we will all talk about in some way, shape, or form. So I'll focus on one of those in a second. But the reality was, even on awful pieces of legislation where Republicans knew that they did not like the bill, they did not like the sponsor, they thought it was setting the state backwards, I kept hearing from my colleagues who were generally willing to break from their party in the past couple of years, you know what, I don't want to be the vote that tanks this bill. I don't want to piss off my colleagues. I don't want to be that person because then they're going to punish me. So this last session, the Republican leadership had a very, very heavy hand on every piece of legislation that was going through the House. Nothing went up on the board unless they knew they had the 31 votes. And it got to the point where we were in session, and if there was one Republican who was late, who decided to take a long lunch, who decided to throw a hissy fit, as we saw a couple of members do, they would stop the entire floor action. So we would literally go and nothing would happen for days at a time if somebody chose to go on a vacation or chose to take a couple of days off because they were mad at their own leadership. So there were a lot of times where we had opportunities to come together and try and find common sense solutions, and instead the majority chose to only do things that they had enough votes for and support for as members of the majority. So I want to highlight a couple things that I got this year that I think were pretty exciting. One, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology named me the Women's Healthcare Champion of the Year, which was really exciting. They joke that they haven't really given it to that many men, but because of the work that I've done to try and make sure that we hold back the fight and really stop the attack on women's health care, from access to abortion to making sure that women have access to simple things like birth control, and making sure that we're expanding sex education classes and programs to ensure that everybody knows what they need to know before they get pregnant or to avoid getting pregnant. So that was the first thing. I actually got it on the House side. On the Senate side, my colleague, Senator Heather Carter, was the women's healthcare champion on the Senate side, and we actually were able to work together along with Senator Kate Brophy-McGee to take a really awful bill that was moving through at the last minute. So we were able to take a bill that was introduced as a $2.5 million slush fund for Kathy Herod and the Center for Arizona Policy. It was originally going to be to go to crisis pregnancy centers, but this bill was so poorly drafted, we didn't know where it was going to go. It wasn't a designated fund, so it was going to go to this crisis pregnancy center concept, but they didn't know which agency or program was going to get it. We got it pulled out of the main budget. Thankfully, we were able to stop it and kill it at the last minute. So when it passed the House, it was going to be $7.5 million over 3 years to promote ideology and promote clinics that aren't actually clinics. So we were very thankful and very happy to be able to work with our colleagues on the Senate side to kill it, because like I said, the House is usually the place where things go crazy, and it's gotten even worse. The Senate has really been the stopgap for a lot of really bad legislation this year. So that was the one big piece of legislation that was related to reproductive health. We were actually really worried as Alabama and Georgia were passing their abortion bans that they were going to try something in Arizona, and we had heard that there was a bill in the works. But because we were trying to get out of there, some of the Republican leadership said, no, let's wait until next year. So when it comes to reproductive health, we need to be on watch and on guard next year. Because this year, literally nothing got passed related to reproductive health that was in their favor. So we know that next year they're going to try 10 times harder to put in bad pieces of legislation. The other thing that I think was really important is there was one really awful bill that was passed in the House that would have allowed people to have loaded firearms in their cars in public schools. It was a change because right now you're currently allowed to have unloaded firearms in your cars in public schools, in your car, not on your person, but still not a great place to have loaded firearms, whether they're loaded or unloaded. And it got to the Senate and we were able to stop it. So again, what has happened this year is kind of a weird thing. So the reason I said this was one of the best years is we were actually able to kill almost every bad piece of legislation because we were able to kill it in the Senate. So that is not normal. That doesn't usually happen. There are a couple of things that could have been better, could have been worse, but the really bad stuff, at least from my perspective as someone who's been working on gun violence prevention and on reproductive rights for years, we had a fairly good session. One of the things that I'll highlight is a bill that I got to work on, which was one of my big accomplishments this year. It's the repeal of what was affectionately known as the No Promo Homo Law. So in 1991, there was a law that was put into place related to sex education when it comes to HIV and AIDS. So at the height of the AIDS crisis in the late 80s and early 90s, people didn't really understand how the virus was transmitted. They didn't understand science about how to prevent it. So the legislature said, okay, you must teach, if you're teaching sex education, how to prevent HIV and AIDS. But there was a couple of problematic pieces of legislation, of language in that legislation that got signed into law. It said you could not promote a homosexual lifestyle as a healthy alternative, which turned into this problem where when it was being interpreted by school districts and charters around the state, they over-interpreted and said, well, not talking about it during HIV and AIDS education means we're not going to talk about LGBTQ people at all. So for the better part of 2 decades, we actually had a system in place where school districts would opt to not even talk about someone like Harvey Milk. Because if you talk about Harvey Milk, he's a gay person, but you're not allowed to promote during HIV and AIDS education. So could someone take a lawsuit and take away some of your funding? So most school districts and charters would say, it's not worth the hassle, let's not even do this. So for the better part of 2 decades, our sex education programs in Arizona were severely lacking because they didn't teach that there could be safe sex between LGBTQ individuals, that you couldn't even talk about these folks, because if you did, it could be promoting an alternative lifestyle. So there was a lawsuit that got brought forth by Equality Arizona and a couple of other national partners, and that forced people to the table. The Attorney General and the Superintendent of Public Instruction said that they weren't going to defend it. So then my Republican colleagues in the House leadership came to me and they said, we need to find a way to make this go away. Let's get the lawsuit, let's just nip it in the bud, it's not worth the headaches to go to lawsuits, let's find a way. Well, there was an amendment that was crafted by Kathy Herod, the president and CEO of the Center for Arizona Policy, which I mentioned a second ago, which is a far right-wing conservative think tank that has won almost everything they've wanted for the last 2 decades. For the last 2 decades, they every year come in and they've gotten to the point where they've had to double down on bad legislation because they've run out of wins. That's how bad it got for a long time. And they say, okay, we know it's already illegal, but let's make it a class 5 felony instead of this because we need to make it more illegal. So they drafted an amendment that was okayed by Kathy Herod, and I took one look at it. And the way that the draft amendment was written, it would actually basically undermine all sex ed in Arizona. So we would go from, you can't talk about LGBTQ people, to now you can't even have sex ed, because this way you can't talk about there being any safe way to have sex. And I said, this is not acceptable. I worked with about 20 different stakeholder groups, both at the state and federal level. And we said, this is the only way that we are going to accept a change. It needs to be a clean repeal of this existing statute, the No Promo Homo Law. And everybody said, Daniel, that's too ambitious, it's never gonna happen. So I partnered with a couple of my Republican colleagues and all of these different stakeholder groups. And then I came to my Democratic colleagues in the House and I said, I've negotiated a deal. We think we can get it done, and this is in less than 48 hours. So we were able to get it passed 55-5 in the House as a part of a bigger package. And then in the Senate, it was 21-9, I believe. But we were able to repeal this law that had been in place for over 20 years that Democrats have been working to repeal for the better part of a decade. So for me, that was a really big win. It's actually one of the reasons why I might have to leave a couple minutes early today. I'm getting an award from an organization up in Phoenix for individual leadership on helping the process and guiding the legislative strategy to repeal that law. It was a big team effort, but part of it was we had been working on this for years, so when the moment arose and we had an opportunity to actually strike while the iron was hot, we had done all of the legwork in advance by working with different stakeholder groups and different organizations. So I'm going to speak for just another minute or two because I know that we want to have plenty of time for questions. This year was a really fascinating year for me. So the piece of legislation that I was working the most over on in the interim last year was the non-discrimination for housing, employment, and public accommodations for the LGBTQ community. We were actually able to get it be led by a Republican in the state Senate. It was one of only 2 bills that was never assigned to a committee because Karen Fan, the president of the Senate, knew that we had enough votes to pass it if it went to the Senate floor, and she refused to let the bill go to the committee, let alone to the floor. But we were able to do for the first time ever is have it be signed and led by 2 Republicans to show that non-discrimination for the LGBTQ community and for all Arizonans is not something that is a partisan issue anymore. We had 2 Republicans that were the co-sponsors. We had an informational hearing, which was not as great as having a full-blown hearing where we could vote aye or nay on the bill, but it was an important first step, and we hope that next year we'll be able to build a coalition around to get it passed. And then I'll wrap up with a couple more highlights. So I mentioned the Women's Healthcare Champion Award that I got from the American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics. I also got an award from the Flynn Foundation as Civic Leader of the Year. It's called the Jack Jewett Award, and it's voted by members of the Flynn Brown Civic Leadership Program, which I did about 8 years ago. And it's a really prestigious honor because Jack Jewett was really a leader here in the state legislature in Arizona who was really working on trying to make Arizona a better place for everybody. And even though he was a Republican, he worked together with both sides, and I actually talked to him a lot about how do we find ways to get people together and to bring them together, and he looks at the state of the current legislature and he's like, I don't know how you do that. Because when he was around, people actually liked each other. Now what's happening is there's no sense of camaraderie, there's no sense of fellowship. Everybody is in their tribe firmly, and they don't see any reason to go and flip and work with other folks, which is one of the reasons why I've been working so much with Republican state senators, because I know that in the House, we have such a hard time getting any person to either break with their caucus or do anything separately, that a lot of the times our stopgap and the only thing that's stopping bad pieces from going through is working with the state senators who are willing to work with us in the Republican caucus in the state Senate. I also was really honored to receive an award just a couple days ago from the Human Rights Campaign. I helped co-found the LGBTQ caucus back in 2017 along with 3 other gentlemen, and we were awarded the Individual Leadership Award for all 4 of us, funnily enough, for starting that caucus. So for me, this was a great session because we were able to repeal No Promo Homo. We were able to stop money from going to crisis pregnancy centers. We stopped loaded guns in schools, but at the same time, we need to stop being in a place where in the legislature we're merely just surviving and keeping our head afloat. We had $1 billion budget surplus, and yet this year there were not as many significant investments in the things that we cared about as Arizonans. So while I'm glad that we put $68 million additional to the 20 for 20 plan that Governor Ducey proposed a couple of years ago, $68 million when we have almost $1 billion in shortfalls is not enough. So yes, it's important and it's great that we got new money, but when we're still almost $1 billion short in public education, when you look at things like the Housing Trust Fund that got $15 million, it's not ongoing money. Only $5 million is going to a designated fund, and that's all going to Maricopa. That's one of the big things. We are investing some money, but in a time where we could have said, it's not about putting money away for a rainy day, because it's been raining nonstop, ironically, here in Arizona, and the needs are great. We've been putting $500 million this last year to get the rainy day fund to $1 billion, because Governor Ducey wants to run for president someday and say that he took Arizona from this credit rating to that credit rating, and that he put our surplus to $1 billion. So I'll end with this. It's been a very fascinating session. I think next year is going to be even harder because we're expecting it to be a really short session. I'm really honored to work with the 2 women who I sit here with today. We have a really great team up there, and what I'm hoping is that not only will we be able to keep moving the ball forward in the right direction, even if it's incrementally in 2020's legislative session, but that in 2020's election, we'll take the majority in the House. People keep talking about the Senate. I'm like, no, let's look at the House. There's more opportunities. No offense to Senator Dalessandro, but the House, I think, has had the most amount of gains because there's just so many more seats. There's 60 seats in the House. So when we're looking at if we single shot people here and single shot people there, we can actually, through a patchwork of different strategies, come up with 30 or 31. We were less than 1,000 votes from taking a 30-30 split this year. So we can do it in 2020 if we work hard. And that's where you all, as members of DCSRA, we're going to call on you for support, not just for our own campaigns, but maybe finding some times where we can adopt a district. I spent a lot of time in Chandler in LD17 last year, where we were able to take a state house seat for the first time in 40 years as Democrats. We know that we need to help her maintain her seat, but then in LD6 and LD20, there are opportunities, and we cannot squander the opportunity and the chance of a presidential year with a competitive U.S. Senate race where we actually have a nominee who's outraising the Republican. Mark Kelly outraised Martha McSally 2-1 almost. So we are focused on doing well in the next legislative session, but we cannot forget that at the end of the day, the number one goal needs to be taking at least one of the chambers, if not both, in 2020. So thank you all so much, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Any questions? Oh, there you go.
Kathy Hoffman was pretty much instrumental, wasn't she, in helping you get rid of the no promo homo or whatever?
So the question had to do with the repeal of no promo homo. So Kathy Hoffman is the new state superintendent of public instruction, and she had said that she would not defend the lawsuit anymore, and because the Attorney General also said that he would not defend it, what was going to happen is there was supposed to be a special meeting of the State Board of Education, which is an entity that's separate from our Superintendent of Public Instruction. Most of them are appointed by the Republican governor. And they were going to have the choice of whether or not they were going to retain outside counsel, or if the legislature was going to go and get its own outside counsel and lawyers to defend this lawsuit because our other two agencies would not. So Kathy Hoffman was a great partner. Like I said, this was a group effort. We had a lot of folks that had helped build it up. To make sure that we had laid the foundation to make sure that the repeal happened. I could spend 2 hours listing all of the different folks, but Kathy Hoffman was a great partner. We had organizations like Equality Arizona that had been talking about doing this work for years. Planned Parenthood was a great partner as well. Jody Liggett, who just left as the executive director of the Action Fund after a long time, was critical to making sure that we kept all of our stakeholders on the same page, because there were some that wanted to go and just let the lawsuit be settled. There were others that said, let's do the repeal right now. So it was folks like Jody and Kathy who said, let's bring everybody together to the table, and we had a really great conversation. That's why I said it was like 30 stakeholders when we had these calls, and we were doing them as snap calls. It was, okay, we have a new amendment. Everybody, let's jump on the phone in 20 minutes. Everybody, let's jump on the phone in an hour. So it was a really great way of seeing how we can all come together when we have our ducks in a row. And I think that's what's so important about planning and getting ready for the next session and the session beyond, that there's a lot of work that we can do on the front end to make sure that if and when we take the majority, we have laid a foundation so that we can work on pieces of legislation that are important, like things to make sure that we protect Roe. Arizona is one of the states that if Roe were to be overturned, immediately laws that were in place before Roe was the law of the land would mean that women could be prosecuted for seeking an abortion or doctors for performing them. So we need to make sure that we do more of that planning and more of that preparation, because we know at any time, either in 2020 or in 2022, we can take the majority, and if we're not ready for it, we are going to be caught flat-footed. And because the Republicans have been in charge for almost 40 years, they're going to run circles around us if we don't prepare. Yes?
Right in the back.
Can you tell me, according to what I've been reading, this state is opposing Obamacare through the state attorney general's office.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it, how can they do it? I know how they do it, but it doesn't make any sense if we already expended Medicaid and Medicare. Why would they do this? It's counterproductive.
right? And I think this is an example of where we are seeing a really weird thing happen right now, where after years of the Republicans trying to repeal or replace the Affordable Care Act, they have not been able to come up with an alternative, let alone a better alternative.
Right.
So while the Affordable Care Act still needs a lot of work, instead of trying to find ways to create fixes, what's happening right now is there is a series of Republican attorneys general, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They are trying to undermine the Affordable Care Act by going through litigation and saying, well, these different pieces are not legal, and therefore the law needs to be changed in this way by the courts. So we have seen, again, when President Obama put it in, there were still things that need to be fixed. A single payer option, a public option would have been something that would have greatly improved the Affordable Care Act. That didn't happen. But now what we're talking about is how do we protect to make sure that people have access to health care if they have pre-existing conditions? How do we make sure that we make it more affordable? There are parts of this state where there are people who don't have very many options. Actually, they'll have one option on the market exchange. So there's a lot of work to be done, and yet what's happening is our Attorney General, Mark Brnovich, is one of the co-signers and is helping lead on this effort to undermine through the courts. So right now, unfortunately, because he is the Attorney General and we are in the minority, there's not much that we can do other than keep hounding him with calls, sharing stories of people who have been impacted positively by the Affordable Care Act, and making him realize that going to court to undermine the Affordable Care Act will actually mean that thousands of Arizonans will lose access to health care. But more importantly, I think to him, is we would lose literally hundreds of millions of dollars, because if we no longer have the state buy-in for our public health program, the Access program, the state of Arizona's budget would need that $1 billion and then some to be able to recover from the deficit of the spending that we would have to have. Senator Kamala Harris made a really great point the other day that we do have universal health care. It's called the emergency room.
Yeah.
But when people go to the emergency room, it is not cost effective. You're not doing prevention. So we need to make sure that we are really badgering Mr. Brnovich with stories and showing to him that this is gonna hurt Arizona more than it's gonna help. And we know that he wants to run for governor in 2022. So we need to make sure that everything we do now, regardless of how this lawsuit goes, that we're holding him accountable. And if and when he runs for governor in 2022 against probably Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, that we let people know this is what he was doing to try and undermine people's healthcare access here in the state of Arizona.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next, Rosanna Gabaldon.
Good afternoon.
You may have to turn down.
Thank you. Oh, yes, what a difference. Thank you very much. I really appreciate DCSRA for the wonderful and welcome and invitation. And I thank all of you for being here to spend the Saturday afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with a few of my talking points, and then I'm going to actually focus on things that were done by the caucus as well as myself. So, the budget had some positive steps, and it was including more money for the classroom, additional pay increases for teachers, money for school counselors, modest additional investment in the housing trust fund, and unfreezing of kids' care, health insurance enrollment. But the Democrats, we held strong with several of the Republican budget holdouts and the state and the Senate Democrats to ensure that these priorities were addressed at least in part. But unfortunately, they were not actually addressed in a way that we as House Democrats agreed. So we voted against the budget. It was something we stuck together, and the budget was approved, but it was by party lines. And but the Republicans just put too many poison pills in there for me to actually vote for the budget in good conscience. There was $346 million to tax credits, permanent tax credits, tax cuts. Excuse me. And the thing is we're sitting on $1 billion in the rainy day fund, as Representative Hernandez has indicated. So the thing is there's things that we could do as a state to actually kind of put, not completely heal, but put some Band-Aids on things that really need to be addressed. And so, also, I couldn't support a budget that strikes back against the teachers for Red for Red. Even though teachers, we were able to give some money to the teachers, it just was not enough. We at the state of Arizona, we have not done enough, in my opinion, to really look at public education. Public education to me is not just K through 12. It's very, very important, but we're talking about our universities, our JTEDs, our early childhood development, and on our community colleges. So that was very, very important. The one thing that we did as House Democrats was we developed a responsible and balanced budget, but we were not brought. Our leadership was not brought into the negotiations with the leaderships of the House and the Senate, the Republicans. And so our caucus found ways to do more for the priorities that Arizona has told us over and over again to address. So I'm going to list some of them, and then I'm going to actually talk about them, two of them in depth. Is water sustainability and treatment of contamination, our crumbling schools, our roads and bridges that are falling apart, the crisis of homelessness in our communities, better services for the most vulnerable in our communities. The thing is we as a state, we continue to give tax cuts, tax credits, and what that does is it just brings less and less revenue. And so, in my opinion, that's unfortunate that we as a state, we continue to do that. But we as Democrats in the Senate and the House, we are fighting back and we're pushing back. And what's really wonderful is that all of you are pushing back as well. And the governor and the leadership with our colleagues across the aisle are hearing that enough is enough. And the thing is we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to push back, not only as Democrats, but all the citizens of the state of Arizona. So one of the things that the state, our schools, and again, this is our state doing this, is our schools will remain among the poorest funded in the country and still is not caught up to funding the state had a decade before the recession. Our roads and bridges will fall apart and further disrepair. Affordable housing will become harder to find. That's the one thing is not only in the state of Arizona, but across our country, is we're looking at people are not being able to afford to live in their residence. They can't find something that's affordable. I can attest to that. Trying to find an apartment in Phoenix is very difficult. You know, the rent is very high, and I have mileage and I have a per diem, but these individuals that are working 2 jobs, that are trying to raise their family, and they can't find affordable housing. And that more working moms will have to leave their jobs because they can't afford childcare. You know, we as a state, we keep taking away childcare subsidies, where families that want to go to work cannot go to work because they have to stay home with their children, or, you know, and what's so unfortunate is we have the problem of neglect, where people are saying, I have to go to work, and they're leaving their children at home alone, and that's so important. So, anyway, I wanted to address 2 of the things that I brought up, and one of them is water sustainability and the treatment of water contamination. It was such an honor and a privilege to actually serve on the steering committee of the drought contingency plan, and that was a step in the right direction. This was something, but it was just a teeny-weeny little step to what the state of Arizona needs to look at when it comes to water sustainability. Actually attended a phone call this last week to actually, they're going to talk about what's called the management plans. And part of the state of Arizona, and I'm going to go in the weeds just for a moment, is that we have what's called active management areas, and there's 5 of them in the state of Arizona. But what's happening is the state of Arizona is not looking at outside of what's called the AMAs. And that is something that has been brought up over and over again, not just by the Democrats, but by the Republicans. And it was very refreshing that we had some of our colleagues from across the aisle that actually we were able to kill some really bad water bills that would have made water a commodity, bills that would have done more to the overpumping of our groundwater. And so those are the kind of things where we have to continue as a state to look at. And we are so behind the 8 ball when it comes to our management plans. We really do need to address that. 2007 was the last time we had a management plan. Now, I'm gonna say that actually there's two AMAs that are really up, that have really are up to the management plan, and one of them is Tucson, the Tucson AMA, which we are in, ladies and gentlemen, because they have planned, they have worked together, and they have come together. The one that I want to talk about is the Pinal AMA, where through the drought contingency plan, the DCP, Pinal County said we need $20 million so that we can continue to overpump those aquifers. And the thing is that's very unfortunate because they did not get their way through the drought contingency plan. And it was put in the budget. It was put into the budget with the promise that they were going to pay it back. But what I'm fearful for, and I'm very doubtful, this is my 7th year at the legislature, is that they're going to change that so that they won't have to pay back the $20 million, which they're supposed to get from the feds. So that's unfortunate. So again, I would love to talk to each and every one of you when it comes to water sustainability. Now, when it comes to contamination, every year I introduce legislation for what's called WARF, which is the Water Quality Assurance Revolving Fund. And what that does is that's our watchdog when it comes to contamination with the orphan areas. What I mean by orphan areas is where there's a contamination. For example, some corporation comes, they contaminate our land, and then they go away, they go out of business, and so there isn't that deep pocket of people that can actually pay for the mitigation of this contamination. So what WARF is very, very important. So the governor, opening day, said, oh, I'm going to put $15 million into WARF, and I applauded that. But that $15 million is coming from fees. It's not coming from the state of Arizona. And so what I think that is actually what it's doing is taking money away from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality that they cannot go out and do their job because they're not going to have the funding to go clean up those contamination areas. So what I did was I introduced a bill for $20 million from the general funds into WARF. And I have to say, I was very surprised, but the chairman of the Natural Resources and Energy Committee actually heard my bill, and it actually passed. And then but it went into appropriations and got killed. Okay? But the thing is it's one thing that it was actually been, and I have to say, when we had a conversation with Representative Griffin, she understands that. But I believe that she knew it was going to be killed in appropriations. So again, it was like, oh, I'm being nice to you. But again, I'm glad that she did that because she recognized the need for funding to ADEQ. Okay. So I'm very proud of that. Also, what I did for water sustainability is I asked for $6 million for hydrologists for the Arizona Department of Water Resources. Because right now, again, we don't know where the water is being pumped. We don't know how much wells are being pumped, especially these, it's called exempt wells. We need to have those hydrologists to go out and actually meter them, actually look at how much water that is being pumped. Because we don't know. Through the state of Arizona, we really don't know what is being pumped and what isn't. And then the last thing that I want to talk about with water is actually, along with Representative Engel and Representative Campbell and others, bipartisan, we actually addressed what is called the water court. We were actually going to, I think it was going to be like $600,000, and we could actually get a judge. We could actually get a bailiff, a clerk, and actually to be able to look at adjudications that are happening throughout the state of Arizona. Who has the rights to pump? What define what's called surface water? And so those are the kind of things where we were trying to put it in the budget, but it didn't happen. But we're gonna, through the interim, we're gonna talk about that. So the next thing I want to talk about is transportation and our roads. I had a visit from the American Association of Civil Engineers, and what they told me is that the state of Arizona, when it comes to the condition of our roads, our bridges, or anything that's in our infrastructure, we're getting C's and D's. Okay? There is certain roads in the state of Arizona that have not been looked at or maintained in 50 years. And so transportation and infrastructure is very, very important. So that is something, I just want to kind of share that with you and kind of let that kind of settle with you in that regards, because we as the state of Arizona, we need to push back in regards to what's called HERF, which is the Highway User Revenue Funds. Because we keep sweeping that. We pay the Department of Public Safety with HERF money, and the thing is we have to continue to look at that and put it back to just HERF. Just to give it back to the counties and the municipalities to actually look at repairing our roads. It's very, very important. Municipalities and counties keep coming back to us taxpayers to sit there and say, hey, you want to repair our potholes? We need cough up the money. So we're taxing you continuously. And when the state of Arizona can step up, and we're not going to solve every problem, but we can step up and say we need to put more money into our infrastructure. Very, very important. I'm very happy that the state and federal funding is going to Mariposa Road, State Route 189. So that's going to be a bypass. So trucks from the port of entry are going to go directly onto I-19 as opposed to going onto the Mariposa Road. Very, very important. Also through the Transportation Committee, which I serve on, is we actually did distracted driving. That we had a bill where it was hands-free, but distracted driving is very, very important. And it's going to go into effect, I believe, in 2021. But that was a piece of legislation that was bipartisan, and I have to say that it was a good thing. And it was led for many, many years by former Senator Farley. And finally, we were able to do that, and the governor, had the signing, and I have to tell you, it was a really good thing, because what's happening, ladies and gentlemen, is people are dying, and this is going to save lives. So speaking about saving lives, I actually had a bill that I have introduced over several years, and actually I had Governor Ducey actually sign my bill. HB 2532 is actually signed into law. And why I want to share this with you is because it's called Critical Healthcare Emergency Responders, and that is something that's going to save lives as well. It's a permissive program where municipalities and counties can have people sign on to the program, and you put a decal on your card to indicate to first responders that there's critical healthcare information in the glove compartment. And but there's some more work to be done. But I have to say that it was a bipartisanship effort. When I went to the Senate President Fan, and she says, I've been supporting this for the years. I'm wondering why it never got through. I said, President Fan, I really need your help, and she really stepped up. She really stepped up. And the thing is the very last day that we were there in session, I was able that they finally put it on the agenda. They put it on my bill 4 times, and we finally, wow. 4th time, we voted for what was called the final read, and we were able to actually pass, to actually get that to the governor's desk. So I'm very honored and very proud. Thank you to my caucus, and to actually the members across the aisle, because that final vote was 60-0. It passed unanimously. So I'm very, very proud of that. Yeah. So also I want to talk about how we as a caucus and going to share some more information and kind of add on to what Representative Hernandez said is 3129, and how disappointing it was to go to work, to do the people's work, and do prayer and pledge, and then we went home because one of their members was not there. That was so unfortunate, and for our leadership to not be heard, to not have those meetings, was very disappointing to me, and I have to tell you, I was sad about that. But the thing is we 29 Democrats. I want to repeat that: 29 Democrats. We held strong, we held together, and we were able to really kill some really bad bills, and we were able to pass some really good bad bills. And with the 700+ bills that were actually introduced in the House, and I think less than 300 got to the governor's desk. And I have to say, between the Senate and the House, only 9 Democratic bills were signed.
Oh my God.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we need to change that. We need to do something about that. So I'm just very pleased and I'm very happy that I'm there representing you. It is such an honor and it's such a privilege to be your voice and to be the voice of the state of Arizona and to be a public servant is something that I treasure, and I feel very honored and grateful and delighted that I serve with these 2 individuals that are sitting next to me, because we make a really good team. And we need to continue to serve with you. So please keep that in mind when we go and we ask for your support this coming election. So I'm very happy to talk with you. I'm very pleased to see all of you, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
I'm probably sounding naive, but why did it take so long for the distracted driving law to go into effect? It seems so common sense. Yeah, but it took years.
Yes. Your question is regarding why it took so long to get the distracted driving actually legislation to go through, and I believe it was kind of ideology, and this is my personal opinion, ideology and the sense of it was being pushed by a Democrat. Even though there was support, I knew there was support throughout the years, but it took a long time for it actually to get to the finish line when families actually started coming in and saying, this is what happened to my child, this is what happened to my spouse, my family member, my friend. And so when it was actually introduced into the transportation, when it was heard in the Transportation Committee, which I serve on, it was very heart-wrenching. And because people were actually talking about the law, the officer that was actually killed. So why it took so long, my personal opinion is because of ideology, and it wasn't important enough, I think, back then. And that was just my personal opinion. But
And just, why is it not going to effect until 2021?
The question was, why it's not going to go into effect until 2021. That was my understanding. That was part of the legislation, the part of the bill. And so my understanding is because it's going to take time, I guess,
for people to adjust.
I guess. And the thing is, hopefully that can change. Hopefully we can change that through legislation. There was Claudette.
Yeah, I was listening to you and I sort of stopped because my head started getting really concerned about why it is that no one knows who's pumping water, who should pump water, how much water they pump. I mean, this is a serious issue in Arizona.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the question is your concern regarding the overpumping, or if there is overpumping, and where there's water and where there's not?
I mean, it's pretty hard to say whether there is or isn't overpumping when you don't know how much is being pumped by who and if you should anyway. I guess I want to know how corrupt is it?
Oh, okay. The question is Claudette wants to know if it's corrupt. I don't believe it's corrupt.
Good.
I believe we're just behind in regards to addressing the water sustainability. I believe that ADW, Arizona Department of Water Resources, is doing their best. But again, I go back to underfunding. They don't have the staff to actually go and do the things. I'll give you a good example of that. Is I asked for how much is being pumped with exempt wells in the active management areas, and it took them over a year to get me that information. So, and the thing is because there was other things that were happening that I believe are more important. And I know it's the pumping of exempt wells is important as well. But the thing is right now the state of Arizona is addressing that. We are going to have new management plans. We are going to address groundwater. We're going to find out what is surface water. what is everything else, and that is something, because that is very, very important. So the reason, and thank you very much for your concern, but the thing is right now, we, not only Democrats, but our colleagues from across the aisle are saying this is so important. There was a piece of legislation that actually Representative Cobb introduced, actually to find out how many wells have been drilled. And so those are the and we are going to continue to look at bipartisan bills that address water sustainability, and those will be addressed through the interim and then a bipartisan study group.
And there are standards that already exist
Yes.
to identify what is sustainable and what is not sustainable, so that's already in place, right?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Arizona Department of Water Resources does have those reports. They do know where it's being pumped. But at the end of the day, what needs to be done is that information needs to be put into management plans, and
Okay.
which we are working on, because I just attended a meeting.
Good. Thank you very much.
It was a, yes, sir.
Do drillers have to have a permit either from the state, the county, or the municipality before they can drill?
The question is if anybody wants to drill a well, they have to, if they need to get a permit. Every well that is drilled in the state of Arizona is required to get a permit through the Arizona Department of Water Resources.
In addition to that, is there provisions for metering that well once it's drilled?
And the question is if we can meter existing wells or future wells. And that is very controversial. Metering is a bad word at the legislature with certain members of the legislature. And so metering is something that and one of the things that at ADWR says is they can look at how much electricity that the well is using, and then they can base it on how much water is being pumped.
But if you go off if you're using solar power to pump your well water, then
If I may, can you and I get together and I can try to answer all the questions that you have, sir. Thank you, I appreciate that.
I have 3 issues, but I'll start with one. My first one is the Rosemont mine. I live in East Sarita. I have an acre. I co-own a well with 4 other parties. Our well, more managers have signed over our well to the Rosemont Corporation. I'm not very happy about that. Basically they're saying that they will maintain the well, but if anything major goes wrong with it, they won't fix it, but they own it now. Now, is there anything in place to help protect us well owners in that area when our wells become contaminated from the mine?
The question is regarding proposed Rosemont copper mine and the drilling of wells. Do I understand your question correctly?
No. Basically, Rosemont, through an attorney action a few years ago, basically they came up with contracts, and they're having all the well owners in the valley sign these contracts. They basically own our wells now.
Wow.
A little bit of maintenance. Yeah.
Let me, if I may, your concern is regarding the ownership of the wells, and I have to tell you, as a state legislature, that is between the well owner and Rosemont Copper. And the thing is, but we as a state of Arizona can look at future drilling of wells for mining. We're basing it on the 1872 mining law. So yes, we as a state, we can address that. But when you're concerned, you'll need to speak to your attorney or because that my understanding is that those are personal contracts between the well owners and the proposed mine.
I was just making sure you guys were aware of that, because we were kind of sandbagged into it, so. Don't mean to hog the floor, but second concern. I'm on the Sonoran corridor route.
Yes. And are you talking about I-11?
No, that's why it's so confusing for everybody. Everybody thinks the I-11 and the Sonoran corridor are the same thing. They're not. The I-11 is the one that's coming down from Phoenix on the National Highway. Sonoran corridor, they want to come off of the L12 ramp, which doesn't exist right now, and they want to come through Sarita and destroy East Sarita. They wanna take out about a couple hundred homes in my area for this freeway bypass.
Your question is regarding the proposed Sonoran corridor? And the plan, I guess, that ADOT has come up with, that they've been working on, since I was on the town council, so you're talking maybe 2007, 2009, and that they were asking for citizens' input for many, many years. And I hope that you did comment on that, and that you did share your concerns, good. But the final decision was actually made, by ADOT and stakeholders in that regard. And why I bring up the I-11 is because when we talk about the Sonoran corridor, they're talking about actually having those trucks actually bypass I-19 and get quicker onto I-10. So that's the only reason why I bought the I-11.
But one point is, East Sarita is not considered a part of the town of Sarita. And one of the biggest problems I'm running into when I speak with the town council and everybody is, they're like, oh, you're not in our district. Excuse me, you guys offered land. What do they plan on doing?
Did you talk to Pima County? Because that's Pima County, correct? And Pima County, I guess, also had input.
Town council offered.
Yeah,
East
we're
Sarita
gonna have to cut that off.
But we'll talk later.
You can talk with her personally later if
Thank
you
you. I
want
appreciate
to.
that.
But we're gonna have to move. Dan, do you have a quick question?
I'd love to hear her talk about recognition of water professionals that she's been working on.
Thank you, and thank you, Nan, for bringing that
Yeah.
up. Actually, I had the House Resolution, 2002, that actually recognized water professionals, the Arizona water professionals, and it was actually signed by the Secretary of State, because water professionals are not recognized, and those are not only just your water operators, but your engineers, your hydrologists, anything that has to do with water, maybe water and wastewater. And so what I did was I took it was a week in April, and I took time to actually recognize the water professionals throughout the state of Arizona, and it was such an honor. Thank you, Nan, for reminding me of that. And we're gonna do it again in April of next year.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll hear from Andrea, Senator.
Thank you so much. Aren't they terrific? Please give them a They had an easier job because the Senate is where all the action was. And I'm so glad I ran into Barb on the elevator because 15 years ago, August 1st, I was the one coming to Green Valley, Sahuarita area and thinking that there were only Republicans here. A few of you go to the Unitarian Church, and on Father's Day, the service started with the leader from the congregation talking about Joe Moody. 15 years ago, Joe Moody was my first mentor here. The office was down in now vacant 116 downstairs, and my then husband Andy said, Andrea, there are Democrats here. So I rushed over, and every Saturday I would come with at least 5 questions for dear Joe Moody. My last memory of him was sitting in one of our offices, wherever DCSRA had space then, during the 2012 campaign. He was pretty nearly blind, and he would be there with a big light and a magnifying glass making calls, so he did see me win the first time. The other couple I would like to honor are the first 2 people who asked me to run, Dick and Audrey Feeney. And Dick was quite a character. We always got great St. Patrick's Day cards from them. And yeah, I hear some people mumbling, I remember that. Well, we called him Two-Hat Dick because what he did, he had a Uncle Sam hat, and if Gabby Giffords was coming to an event, he would have Giffords on his hat. But if she wasn't coming, he'd have Dalessandro. So one day Gabby said, who's a candidate who's lucky enough to have a constituent wear a hat with her name on it? I said, me too. But she didn't know because she never saw the Dalessandro. She only saw the Giffords. So it reminded me of that. And I can tell you, I could talk a half an hour about each of the questions because some of you asked very, very good questions. And I'm going to focus on a couple of things that really kind of have everything they said is important, but I am the senior member on the Senate Judiciary Committee. So I've been there the longest, and Eddie Farnsworth, you know, the guy who became a millionaire from the charter schools, he's the chair. So over my 6 years on the Senate Judiciary Committee, I have seen, especially after Ducey got elected, I have seen a power grab. Not this session, but previously, he expanded, the legislature expanded the Arizona Supreme Court from 5 to 7 members. This was totally unnecessary. It was a power grab, and it's kind of like what we see on the federal. There are a lot of crazy things that we see on the federal, and we see the same thing in Arizona. Just last week, a report, and I estimated, I stood in opposition to it, because I said, number one, the courts have not requested it, they don't need it. A report came out just last week saying they didn't hear more cases, they didn't do anything except probably waste about $1 million in taxpayer money, because you figure two Supreme Court justices' salary and benefit package, health care, pension, everything probably costs, and then you think of law clerks, secretaries, assistants, and everything else. So we're really vindicated. His power grab this time, because you know, like you hear in Congress, the Senate is advise and consent. So the governor sends nominees to us, and the nominees for a very important commission that you probably never heard of is the Commission on Appellate Court Appointments. And what this committee does, it's a 15-member committee headed by the Chief Justice of the Arizona Supreme Court, who's now a Democrat, but probably after he retires, there won't be a Democrat in that position. But they screen candidates for the Arizona Supreme Court. There'll be vacancies because people are retiring. They screen candidates for the Superior Court and for the Appellate Court. But the most impactful is they screen candidates for the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission, who after the 2020 census will be screening Democrats. They'll be sending 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans, and I think it's only 5 independents, and they'll go through the interviewing process. And then the governor doesn't get to pick them, though. It's the leaders of the Senate and the House, the Democrats and the Republicans, pick the 2 Democrats and the 2 Republicans. And then the people that get on from the Democratic and Republican Party, they get to pick, work with the independent, and the independent is the chair. So this was another power grab. There are 15 members, now there are only 13, and they have to be, some of the members are lawyers, some of them are non-lawyers, and they have to be from certain counties. Currently, only 13 of the 15 positions are filled, and they are either Republicans or Republican-leaning independents. So they are independents who had been Republican PCs. They only give to Republican candidates. So, I said, as a Democrat in committee, I said, I'm frustrated because there are no Democrats, and Eddie Farnsworth kind of chastised me in a nice way, though. He doesn't get nasty to me, because he has 7 daughters and 1 wife and no sons, so he's nice. And I'm the only woman on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he said, well, I was frustrated when Napolitano was governor. Well, when Napolitano was governor, she had 7 Republicans and 8 Democrats on the committee. That was the intent of the voter initiative that established the Independent Redistricting Commission. And I'd just like to comment on the guns on campus, because that came before our committee, and the NRA from what actually testified in our committee. But to counter them, we had 2 things. We had a retired teacher who said, support the PTA, not the NRA. And you know what gave me a lot of comfort, because I often felt alone at the legislature in the 7 years I've been there, but Moms Demand Action were there. They were there with their shirts, with us all the time. And the House did kill a bad bill, the Pebble Purge bill, that anyone who hadn't used their Pebble in so many election cycles. So thank you, House for doing that. And when I asked the senator who sponsored it, how many people would that impact, She said, I don't know. So, you know, so. Okay, I'm just trying to pick out a couple of high points here. Let me, I did not vote for the drought contingency plan.
I didn't hear all that. Can you
I
repeat?
did not vote for the drought contingency plan. I was not I was an alternate. They would not appoint me to that because I would have been fighting for more conservation. And because I have we have a progressive court, 2 Latino guys and me in the Senate, and the 3 of us voted no, and in the House there was 1 abstention. In Pinal County, most of the agricultural money comes from Big Ag, and I didn't like the thought of them digging deeper wells. Heather asked a question, you know, about wells in East Sahuarita. Well, same thing with that. And I felt that the Big Ag is making big bucks. They could do their own infrastructure. We shouldn't be paying for it. And that did earn me, I'm one of 4 people to get an A+ from the Sierra Club. And when you're leaving, I have some other stuff about my report card. You know, once a professor, always a professor. We heard about the texting while driving bill. Senator Steve Farley worked his butt off for more than a decade on that bill. Some of the, when Andy Biggs was president of the Senate, God forbid he's in Congress now, but he was against the nanny state. He felt, you know, even though all the other states passed laws about texting while driving. So here you see Steve Farley introducing that bill year after year, not getting credit for it. Also, Katie Hobbs had bills year after year about testing untested rape kits year after year, and it didn't get passed in her name. This year, one of the reasons I ran for public office was against the 4-hour block of English language learners. In spite of the audience here, LD2 is a Latino district. It's what we call a minority-majority district. Most of our constituents are Latino. Most of the kids in the school are Latino. So to put them in a 4-hour block, especially in high school, those of you who know me know I was in addition to being an elementary, community college, and university professor, I also was a high school teacher. How can a kid graduate from high school if he or she is segregated for 4 hours a day? How do you take your math, your science, your STEM classes? You know, so the dropout was a failing program. Well, I sponsored it every year since 2013. And a Republican sponsored it this year, and it passed. So, I want you to make sure you take one of my pens, because these pens write. These write. How many of you have ones for years? You know, Representative Hernandez likes to make fun of me about my pens, but they write. They're big, and they say senator on it. So if I get rid of this bunch, I could get a new bunch that says representative, because I'm termed in the Senate, so I'll be running for the House. Representative Gabaldon is termed in the House, and she'll be running for the Senate. So we have to keep our LD2 team together. Let me talk about something that really was the most heart-wrenching bill that made me really lose sleep. Even though, there was a bill that wanted to extend the statute of limitations for people who had been sexually abused as children. And it was on the calendar, on the agenda for our Judiciary Committee, and it was printed out, and then at the beginning of the committee, Eddie Farnsworth said, it's not going to be heard. And it was the last week to hear bills. Talked to the Attorney General's office, not him, Bernovich, and I don't actually get along because of his words added to the solar initiative last year. I've been seen protesting outside of his office in Phoenix, but that's another story. And one very brave Republican senator, Paul Boyer, who has some roots in Tucson. I don't agree with him on very much, maybe 20%, because we do vote a lot of bills unanimously. He had just had a son the month or 2 before, and he said, I am not going to vote for the budget unless this gets signed by the governor to extend the statute of limitation for someone who was sexually abused as a child. Now, who was against this? You know, although I go to the Unitarian Church and I'm seen other places, I come from the Catholic tradition, so it was the Catholic Church the Mormons, and the Boy Scouts who were against this.
Wow.
Yeah. So Paul Boyer said, I'm not voting for the budget. And then Heather Carter, who worked with us on the loaded guns on campus bills and the phony health centers, Heather Carter said she wouldn't vote for it unless that was passed. And then she was joined by the 13 Democrats. So Paul insisted that the governor actually sign the bill before he voted on the budget. So he signed it that last day, May 28th, and then we were there at night to 1:30 in the morning signing it and everything. But the governor did have an honorary an honorary signing. He actually signed it, but then they had one, for the press conference and everything. So the governor was there, and then Paul Boyer, Senator Boyer spoke, Senator Carter spoke, and then a woman who was a world-class athlete spoke, and she, when she was 15, striving to be an Olympian, she was abused by a 35-year-old team member. And she was the only one at the press conference who said, thank you, Governor, because he signed it. Thank you, Heather Carter. Thank you, Paul Boyer. And thank you, Senate Democrats, because we really made a difference. So I got a pen. I didn't bring it because it doesn't write anymore. It's a Governor Ducey pen, and it doesn't write.
Your pen's right.
I don't buy cheap. We did some good things. We have a teacher shortage, and I believe I'm the only legislator who's taught elementary, high school, community college, and university. We do have a teachers academy, and it's through all three of the universities, and they're also working with the community colleges in every county, so that's really good. We also re-upped for kids care, kind of the kids that aren't as poor that they can get access, but their parents can't afford affordable health care. So thank God we did that, because we're losing millions and millions of dollars. I'm the ranking member, and my friend, when you leave, if you take one of my, because I don't want to talk about some of my stuff, but I am the ranking member of Senate Education, and we do work with Kate Brophy-McGee. She's talking to me now, but I voted for a charter school reform, but it's so entrenched in Arizona, the lobby for the charter schools, that it didn't go far enough. So we tried, we got it through committee, I voted yes, she hugged me, but we still had demands that were unmet, and we couldn't go on. But we have done some good things. Last session, we made it possible for the charter school board to shut down a school if it's in very deep financial trouble. We also, this year, we add 5 new full-time equivalency employees, to monitor it for more accountability. And one of my great sources is the Grand Canyon Institute.org. It is our bipartisan think tank in Arizona, and it examined a lot of things about insider trading and other stuff with charter schools. So Grand Canyon Institute.org, if you look at that. Now, I'm not the oldest woman senator on the Democratic side, but I am the senior one. There were some people who were older than me, hard to believe, but we do have young people, but we did try yet again to get the ERA passed. And I can tell you, what happened is, so I was up first, it was arranged with the speaker, and we had all of our speakers, and so I get up, and there's a half of the audience is for some progressive cause, and the other half are all Republican women. And so I get up and say, my comments will relate to the supporting of the IRA instead of the ERA. So everybody laughed, and a nice way. I'm not so sure about some of the Republican women. But I said, I do have to tell you, there was a stock transaction in my Roth IRA this morning, and there really was. What happened? Republican women signed on to it, and one was conveniently absent. Okay? The other voted no. So I believe Representative Hernandez said, you know, they get hell if they don't toe the line. And even the crazy pregnancy centers, some of the really radical Republican women said, oh no, we're not gonna hear that stupid bill again. You know, because what happens if they vote with the Democrats, then Kathy Herod put somebody further to the right to primary them and the fundraising. I'm lucky I get to be a clean elections candidate, so I don't owe anybody. Speaking of some things on the right, there was a study committee. We work sometimes closely with Gail Griffin. Last year, I had a bill, and she had a friendly amendment, and it was the only friendly amendment I had seen in the first 6 years. Now, luckily, we have had more friendly amendments, but there's some interesting people in Sonoyta, and Elgin, and Santa Cruz County, and they didn't want to be in Santa Cruz County anymore. They wanted to go to Cochise County. Well, I didn't like that because we represent all of Santa Cruz County, and it would cost a lot of money and have to have several elections and, you know, all kinds of drawing lines. And what happens in Sonoyta and Elgin, it's very rural. It's a beautiful part of our legislative district, but they have 137 children in their school. So they pay more school taxes. The voters also very wisely voted for a fire district. And so naturally their fire district is more than our fire district costs. So their taxes are higher. Their county taxes are equivalent. And if they were to leave Santa Cruz County, the produce industry and the people in Tubac and Rio Rico and Nogales would have to pay more property taxes because most of the costs are fixed. The number of county supervisors, the judge, the attorney, and stuff like that. So the Democrats all said no, and 2 Republicans said no, and we killed it. So they never invited me to a meeting. They never called my office. That I've asked my assistant, are you sure? And so they put nasty letters in the paper that aren't true. I would just like to, because I do want to save some time for questions. Eventually I want to retire. Because I really think that the Independent Redistricting Commission did this legislative district for me, because I lived smack dab in it. And I had run twice in 2008 and 2010 when it was LD30. Many of you were supporting me then. And it was a very Republican district, and I gave them a run for their money. And after 2010, I said, let me go away. Let me take a trip. And then they redistricted LD2 to LD2, which is a Democratic district. And I know that unfortunately, in 2014, Representative Gabaldon and I had a wonderful Latina who works at the U of A, who we wanted to be the representative, and unfortunately, she made it to the Board of Supervisors, and they picked someone else. And even though we're a very Democratic legislative district, a Republican one. And so we didn't want that to happen, so that's why it's really important. I'm a clean elections candidate, and I'll have a paper that has information about that, and also some of my other things, what I need. Everything is going really well, and I just want to end with one thing. In Arizona, whiskey is made for drinking, water is made for fighting. So there are a lot of examples. You want to see, go to one of these rural communities. And I've been there before I was elected in Cochise County when they thought about voluntary monitoring of exempt wells, and a fight would break out. Maybe even a gunfight. So thank you very much. I'd be happy to take your questions. And I I do have petitions, so I also have a list of all of you who've signed already, but my friend Pat Sharp, raise your hand, Pat, please. Thank you. So she has some, and I have pens, take the pens. Questions? Questions? Yes?
Are you gonna try and bring the ERA up again?
Of course,
Oh, good.
of course, of course, of course. Yeah, and that the House, you know, the House has tried several times, but when we have, you have to understand in the legislature, whether you're in the House or in the Senate, the chair of the committee has the ultimate power if a bill gets on the committee agenda. And so you have, like, the Republicans just get their self-serving bills on. Oh, I work for a fireworks company. So let's expand the season for fireworks, which is just really, really smart. You know, oh, I work for this kind of company, or, you know, I'm a rancher, let's get this bill passed, you know, and there's a lot of that, you know. And we just do things to benefit LD2. We don't get rich over any of our bills, that's for sure. Yes?
As a person that does not use a computer much,
Okay,
has no email,
okay.
I would really like to see more information made public in a newspaper.
Okay. Well, Dan sure does print my opinions whenever I ask him, but it's limited, you know. But I would be, you know, I just want to tell you something. What happened? I sent a letter asking for money for somebody who I don't know, and she wrote me back and she said, you know, I've signed your petition online because I believe everybody has the right to run for office, but I don't know if you're my candidate. What are your positions on this, this, and this? And I wrote her back, and then she said, where do I write the check? How do I write the check out? You know, so it's hard. I don't know. The newspaper might not want to hear my stories. What they might want to hear is that, oh, I didn't get any bills passed. Because that's why I applauded for Representative Gabaldon, because it's really hard to get anything passed. Right. You know, and so it's difficult in the paper.
You mean I'm gonna have to actually go and buy a computer?
Well, I don't know. They took me when in 2010, they took me kicking and screaming to do Facebook, and now I couldn't live without it. Though, you know, that's the best way, you know, to get news. And this woman said, I'm not on Facebook, but it really impacts my husband and my vote, you know. So what I did is I sent her an email, but it had links in it. I'm sorry. But you know what, we'll try, maybe we can make a commitment to put some things in, you know, printed material in the office, because all of you have access to the office. I think I see a hand here, yes.
Well, I was actually going to make a suggestion related to Jim's concern, and I see on your handout that you just passed out the note that, and I've heard this in the past, that unlike Congress, the state legislature does not have an independent constituent services fund for each member. So I just point that out as perhaps, you know, depending on the amount of fundraising that can be done, whether there could be mailings mailed directly to, you know, legislative update mailings in paper form mailed to certain constituents who request that. But of course that costs postage and stuff. But I found that really a creative approach that you have here.
Thank you. That's why they pay me the big bucks. It does cost me more to serve than I make. I've gone through 4 cars. My car I came to Arizona with for 15 years. I had thought it would be my car for the rest of my life. You know, where would I go? I'd go to Green Valley, maybe I'd go to Tucson once in a while. I drive 80,000. My car will be 3 in December. It has 86,000 miles on it. Jeez. So it's about 30,000. And
I just want to comment more on Jim's comment about those people, those who don't own a computer. The Joyner Library has very strong computer education and access to the computers there, and they will help. They'll teach you anything you need to know. So I encourage those who are not computer literate, don't want one, don't have one, or you know, the one they had finally dies, and they're not gonna put another cent into technology. The Joiner Library is the place to go, it's really, really excellent.
Great information,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, and I love clean elections, and hardly anybody is clean elections anymore. Those of you who've given to me the $5, on August 1st, you'll be getting a form that's 3/4 filled out, and you can do it online, and my letter there has all the information on it. My biggest need is always for signatures, because I need 432. And because I'm clean, I can file the first business day in January. And then I can get it out of the way, where traditional candidates can't file until later. They have it later in the spring. So I like to get it out of the way before we start the legislature. Yes, Lois?
I have one other question,
Sure.
totally different, and this is not only for you, but also
Sure.
for Dan and Rosanna, if you choose to respond. The process for request to speak,
Right.
how effective, in your experience, how effective is that process?
Okay, thank you, Lois. When it was brand new, they used to read out your names, so they would, and I used it from before I was elected, and then they'd say Andrea Dalessandro is for or against this bill. Now what we see is all the names for and against, and we can look at the comments too, but I can't speak to how many legislators it impacts,
Okay.
you know.
That's good.
Yeah. Like to have something?
The request to speak is a,
You don't have a microphone as big as the other person.
question is request to speak, RTS system. And one of the things that I'm glad that you asked this question is because some of our colleagues from across the aisle were very concerned because they thought that we as Democrats were putting fake names, you know, saying, oh, you know, these people. But I have to tell you, some bills like the VRA and other things had hundreds of people that were in support of certain bills. And so I believe it's an effective tool because we as Democrats can sit there and say, through RTS, we have 500 plus people that are in support or against if it's a bad bill. And so continue, please, ladies and gentlemen, continue to do RTS because it does, and it is public record.
Right.
Thank you.
You know, and in the budget, there was $500,000 for voter fraud. We've had, if I probably count them on my fingers and toes, the number of voter fraud things that we've had. But on a positive note for LD2, the aviation and technology program at Pima Community College got $15 million. They were initially promised $20 million, but they went back to 15 because those men and women in that program have jobs lined up already because there's a big waiting list. And with the airport being in our district and Davis-Monthan and the Air National Guard, this is the summary of the Senate, what happened. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed the things I've decided, especially the pen they do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's give them a big hand.